welcome for the second day of the conference. I hope you enjoyed the social event yesterday, as I did. And it was very pleasant weather also here, which is not completely usual, but it was a good point. So I'm very pleased now to introduce Henri, he's a head of unit here in CRP Tudor for the enterprise engineering team. He has joined us in 2010, in May 2010, in order to develop a research program on architecture-based service innovation in networked enterprises. And the team is growing and is tackling many topics related to enterprise engineering. Eric has worked in many locations and domains about enterprise engineering, and he's been in Netherlands, where he received his PhD in 1994. And after that, he went to the computer science department at the University of Queensland in Australia. And after that, he became lecturer and had different interventions. But Eric worked also in industry as a consultant at Origin, but also at Capgemini. And you have been combining industry and academia, and you are also combining professorship, and you are chair of the Radboud University of Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. And we are very pleased to have this talk today about enterprise architecture and process improvement, and you will see how one may learn from the other. And I'm sure there are many opportunities that we are going to discover and discuss. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I haven't started yet. So yeah, I understand you had a good dinner. So did I. This is my 4th conference day, so I've been also, I can sympathize this whole thing. Just been in another conference, also in Luxembourg, that's after all these dinners. So, okay. What I'm going to present is based, or is also discussed in a few recent papers that I worked on, but it's not just me, but the entire group of people around me. So this is representing some of the existing ideas. This is what I aim to cover. I'm okay with questions in between. I already know that we need to squeeze a little bit to stay on time because we don't want to ripple late starts all the way through the program. So we'll see how we can keep things a bit compact. But if there are any questions, then please ask. I can squeeze things a little bit. I will start with a few examples, just a few samples of things in the area of enterprise architecture. Because have you, I mean, I don't know this audience precisely, do you know what enterprise architecture is? Yeah, only 1 or 2 people, so it's good, otherwise we'll skip that. Then a little bit about the playing field, that should describe why we need something like enterprise architecture and what we're trying to do with it, why bother. And leading to the role of enterprise architecture, and then some slides about where I would say, okay, well, how can one learn from the other, process improvement in enterprise architecture. But I think some of that will already be touched upon in the other points. So, some samples. These are models. Who thinks this is UML? No, okay. If you would have thought UML, that would have been fine, because this looks a lot like UML, but it's not actually Archimate. Problem is not completely Archimate, but those are modeling languages, and these are models that architects use to describe how do I use the laser on this thing? In here? Ah, yeah, there we go. This is would be showing how applications interact with each other, and this is showing how business transactions and roles within organizations interact with each other. And just some diagrams. And this is a diagram also used in this field of enterprise architecture to show how a business process, up here, if you can't read it, it's fine, just believe me, this is a business process, interacts through other business processes and all the way how that connects to applications. So it also shows how things fit together. And this is another version of a similar diagram. So we have these diagrams, and like UML is used for software engineering, Archimate, but also other languages. There are alternatives. I used to represent designs of enterprises, ranging typically from the business process, business services, value exchanges, all the way down to the application, and even beyond that towards IT infrastructure. In principle, you could even include routers and connections at that level into those diagrams, so you can see the entire connection. This is an entirely different beast, because these are three pictures, but they are what we call views. They're not the full detailed models, but they are representations of partial information that are more suitable for stakeholders. A manager likes to see spreadsheets. Oh, we can show you spreadsheets. Sometimes people like to have overviews. That's a landscape map that accidentally shows how applications map towards business functions and organizational structures. So who is using what for what purpose? This is just an illustration. It's accompanied by a structured text that explains to people with, in this case, a law background, what the business process is like. Lawyers don't like workflow diagrams, so they like text. So we also use these diagrams to make the message more clear. Let me talk to that. This is another sample of something that enterprise architects might use, and this is a so-called architecture principle. It's a bit like a regulation or a law that you would like to apply. And this, we have a better one actually. This one would say, whatever you do with our application portfolio, so if you add new applications, we want you to provide all the functionality through an enterprise portal. So we only want to have one access point, you go there, and there you find the functionality, then you might hop off to another web interface, but it has to be offered through the portal. So we don't have 20 applications, we have one portal. And typically that comes with a rationale of why we want this, and also implications for the architecture. And in contrast to the models, these things allow for more high-level steering of what do we really find important, where we want to base our decisions on. Gives more overview and structure. When we have all these models and views, before we know it, it becomes too messy, it becomes too big. So there's a lot of models that, and a lot of things to be looked at. So that's why people created in the past these frameworks. And this one you might have heard about, that's the Zachman framework. This is a framework developed by Capgemini, and that's the framework underlying the Archimate language. The reason for having these frameworks is that it gives us a bit of a landscape of what do we need to talk about when we architect an enterprise. So for instance, Capgemini's IAF, this one, would suggest that you need to talk about why we need it, why do we need the enterprise, what does it have to be about, what should it do, how are we going to do it, and with what technical means, and with also human means. Orthogonal to that, they say you should talk about what you do in terms of your business, so what's your business about, in French, le métier, what do you do to earn money, information you need for that. So what data information do you need to do that? What applications are needed? Information systems, but really they mean applications here, and the underlying IT infrastructure. So separation of concerns, talk about different topics. And each of those frameworks, so the Zachman framework, Capgemini's IAF or Archimate, each of those frameworks has a story of why they think it should be structured like that. In my younger years, I also tried to create the ultimate framework, but of course that doesn't work because that's very much dependent on your religion, so to speak, about how to design this stuff. But it helps architects to structure all the information. This is a different thing again, because this takes a different view and also tries to structure information, but it really tries to structure the dialogue. Because the other frameworks are really aimed at saying, okay, I'm going to design an enterprise, and what am I going to have to look at? Well, IT, yeah, but also information, business processes, I need to look at all these things. This one says, yeah, but what are the forces in the organization that you need to take into account? What are the stakeholder groups? What are the focal points, the concerns from a strategic point of view that you need to take into account when we change an enterprise? Because if you deny those or close your eyes to them, then they will disrupt the transformation, because there are stakeholders involved who will influence, whether you want it or not, what happens with the transformation, what happens with the change. They will cause changes, they will disrupt changes. So you need to bring them aboard, and that leads to a list, and 12 is usually the sensible maximum, otherwise it gets too messy. But really, people that you need to bring to a table, looks a bit like a round table, groups that you need to bring to the table to involve in the discussion, so it's a stakeholder management perspective. And you can then use these other frameworks to structure the dialogue of what are we talking about, so that's really complementary. So that's what we deal with when we talk about architecture. Doesn't say yet why we need architecture, just some samples. So let's go to the playing field. So that first enterprises, then enterprises in motion, whatever that is, and steering the motion. Okay. Enterprises. That's more or less generally considered by our people as a social system with a purpose. Assumed purpose, because if you look at a real organization with real people, then it's not always that clear what the purpose is, and there's also different interpretations. So it's very wise to add the assumed in there, but I'll come back to that in a minute. It typically involves technological artifacts, such as IT, but also machines, robots, cranes, all kinds of machinery to better achieve the assumed purpose. It's not just humans, but a lot of tools too. And therefore they are social technical systems. Social and technical. And that's also a very important aspect here. I will address in a while that enterprise architecture originated out of the IT field. If you first call it IT architecture, then information system architecture, now it's enterprise architecture. An IT system is a technical artifact. And with enterprise architecture, we all of a sudden talk about social technical system. So we have had to and still have to learn a lot, because we're designing something that has human actors in there as well. But humans don't behave like computers. Bugger. So we have more work to do. I need to be careful. So in using the term enterprise, we of course also refer to the technological architects. Okay. There's this field, some of us call enterprise engineering, some of us call business engineering, organization engineering. I just like enterprise engineering, hence EE. It's nothing to do with my first name. So it's about construction of enterprises and their change. Construction of enterprises, but also construction of the change, the transformation that we want to do to them. And that, of course, involves multiple perspectives. IT, that's where, for most of it, it's all started from, the business. But there's more. There's information, there's organization, and especially the 3 dots. There's more. Should be based on scientific principles, in the sense of construction based on scientific principles. That's why we call it engineering. Go back to the engineering definition, then it's very much about scientific principles applied to the creation of phenomena and things. And it should be model enabled. Software engineering tends to use the word model driven. That works quite well with computers, but I don't think humans would consider themselves to be model driven. So we enable them. Another reference to the fact that this is a social technical level, not just technical. And then going back to the definition of enterprise, social system with an assumed purpose. When we take an engineering point of view, we say, yeah, it has a purpose, because you need an anchoring point. But when we look at the actual change and transformation in the organization, we have to realize that, oh, wait a minute, what's happening there is not necessarily always rational, driven by the purpose. So there's a bit of tension there. And we humbly only look at the engineering part. The other parts, there's a lot of change management, also social sciences that we will interact with. We want to focus on the engineering bit, hence EE. So how do manifest them? How do enterprises manifest themselves to us? Primarily in terms of the interaction between the social, between the social actors and their technological artifacts. So among the social actors, but also how they use technical artifacts, because that's the thing we can observe. In an organization, people take on work, they promise to do things, they ask other people to do things, they organize themselves, they talk about it, they use artifacts, we can observe that. And we can observe the enterprises then, we as in our field, I'm not saying how normal humans can do it, but we observe them in terms of models that capture that manifestation and of course the design of the technological artifacts they use. We can also dig into the technological artifacts to some extent, but it's primarily about this interaction. That's where the enterprise is. Okay. In motion. Not emotion, but in motion. If you look at enterprises, then they usually have a lot of reasons to change. New compliance, rules, new markets, deregulation, creating new opportunities. And if we don't take the opportunity, our competitor will, so shit, we do have to change. Reduce protectionism, globalization, etc., etc. The move to the service economy, servitization, client needs on the floor, on the work floor, in a normal business process, client needs might change, so that might lead to a change of the business process as designed. And there's a whole lot of new technologies. And most importantly, there are 3 dots. Of course, there's more. But these are among the usual suspects. And they invite organizations to change. So they need to change. And these drivers sometimes also contradict each other, so you have to make choices, make high-level choices, going back to the strategy, but also design choices. That's why we need architecture. And these changes are also initiated from different angles. So they might be initiated top-down, say a strategic level, a boardroom level, saying we should turn left, we should become more service-oriented as an organization. Or they could be initiated bottom-up. Someone working on the organization, thinking, I can do my work much better if I start using Dropbox to share my files with my colleagues internationally. That's a local change, not initiated top-down. Or maybe we should do this credit check differently, in different order, because this is too slow for the business process. So for my clients, I'll do it in a different order. That's a choice that in a financial institution might be made at the local level. Of course, it's very tricky because that might impact compliance. That's again one of the reasons why we need things like architecture. So that can happen top down, bottom up, and have different rhythms. So it might be stipulated in the sense of someone thinking about it, setting out a course, and then follow that. Might be more self-organizing, deliberately self-organizing, premeditated, spontaneous, all kinds of modi. So enterprises change. And yeah, goes by different names. So sometimes we say it's service innovation, it's innovation, service innovation, business innovation. You can call it business transformation. Consultancy firms typically talk about things like business transformation. Or if it's about more the technology that changes, the platform changes, we call it technology transformation. But it also goes by different other names like bricolage, make do what you have, and that way do a bottom-up change, or design things to bottom up. M&A, merger and acquisitions, or the inverse, splitting and outsourcing. There's another interesting term, organizational drift, that field really identifies the fact that you formulate your business strategy top down, but then you see the organization actually drifting in its own way along the time. So it's all about change. I skipped one because, of course, the red one, process improvement, is also yet another type of change in this sense. I wanted at some stage to call, because I wanted to generalize from this and say, okay, all this stuff is called, initially I said enterprise transformation, but enterprise transformation is defined by some researchers as really premeditated large-scale change. Okay, so we have to find a new term, and on the internet I couldn't find people using the word enterprise emotion, so I suggest to generalize that to there. Now, the disadvantage of enterprise in motion is that you might mispronounce it as enterprises emotion. Yeah, okay. But there is something very nice about in motion. It's very teasing, especially to enterprise architects, because it really signals that while you're thinking, while you're designing the future state, the thing is still in motion. So while you're thinking about where are we, or where were we, where are we, where do we want to go, why do you want to go there, how should it look like, while you're doing that, it's already changing, and it's continuous to change. And then when you know where you want to be, then you need a change project, a big transformation project, to make the changes. But wait a minute, we're making changes to something that's already changing. And that's why I like also the teasing element in the word in motion. It's in motion, it's not standing, it's not waiting. So when we do that, we can also say that we have two aspect systems in an enterprise. Aspect systems, that means that those are systems where we have actors that can play dual roles. As an example, when I do my work, one actor, I'm also thinking how to optimize it or how to do it differently. So I'm playing a role in two systems at the same time. Two aspect systems, not component systems, aspect systems. So there are two aspect systems, the running system and the motioning system. Sometimes also exemplified in terms of a mill, like a mill to produce grain or to refine grain. You can run the mill and you can change the mill. One aspect system is looking at running the mill, and the other aspect system is concerned with changing the mill. Or making ice cream and thinking about how to optimize that or change that, changing how you use ice cream. So the two aspect systems. And the motioning system then motions the entire enterprise. So the motioning system can also improve itself. Software process improvement. Business process improvement is about using the motioning system to improve business process. Software process improvement is about using the motioning system to improve the software process, because the software process is actually a process that changes the motioning system, the running system. Unless you're a software company, because then it's the other way around again. So it's also a bit fractal in the sense that you can stack it up. But in the normal enterprise, like a bank, well, this is Luxembourg. Normal enterprise like a bank, this is about banking, and software engineering is up here, and process improvement of software engineering is up here too. Which you can of course stack. Now, assuming it's a good idea to steer this, well, in general it is, because also what I said, I, as an individual co-worker of an organization like Tudor, could make a decision to say, in my daily work, I will start using Dropbox. So I, as an actor, halt between running, doing research, and motioning, making a change. And I make the decision. But I'm not the CEO. So, do I have permission? Well, I'm Dutch, so I'm not asking for permission, just doing it. So, of course, we shall do that. But you could imagine that if this would be a financial institution, we would have a slightly different ballgame. Or if this would be a defense organization, it would certainly be different to say, okay, I'm going to use Dropbox. Unless, of course, I would be working for the NSA, then it's fine. It's all friends. So, there's a bit of a governance question there, and also the question, do you want to steer? Of course, there's always a bit of steering in the sense that someone makes the decision, but do you want to have more explicit steering? So, okay, we want to do that. Well, there we have different names again. You can talk about management, governance, control, guiding. Then I jump to essentially cybernetics and say it's all about steering. So let's call it steering the motion. Leading to two additional aspect systems, producing and steering. which is orthogonal, because of course in both systems we have steer. And in making the decision while working to introduce Dropbox in my daily work, I'm actually playing almost all 4 roles, because my daily work I also steer, I do my daily work, I make a decision to make a change to that, allow myself to do it, and I make the change. So as a human, we typically hop between all 4 of them, but it does make sense to say, okay, we have these aspects and separate them, because they interact. Now when we talk about steering motion, then there are also 2 interesting paradigms to take into account. The bottom one should be familiar to process improvement. For enterprise architecture, this was not that common. The whole story about guys, this thing is in motion while you're thinking, is for enterprise architects was, or is, still something new. Just jump ahead, if you look at standards in our field like Tudor, which is from the Open Group, standardization organization, they still talk about, very much about baseline architecture and target architecture. Baseline as in, where am I now? As if you can know that, and where you want to be. And in 3 months' time you might know that, but it's all moving. So plan to check that kind of thinking needs to be introduced. The other one is control theory. This is from robotics, which is essentially an operationalization of feedback systems, cybernetics again, sense, think, act. Where are we? What's happening? Think about that, reflect on it, and then act upon it to make a change when necessary. And this, interestingly enough, this act is not the same as that act. Because sensing act, the sensing and thinking for the planning phase of PDCA is sensing and thinking. And then the do of PDCA is actually the act in the robotic sense. And the funny thing is that the check is again another sense, followed by an act, which is then think and act. So the PDCA act should have been called ideally react. Because reacting. Okay. The good thing is, these are not my paradigms, so I don't have to defend the names. So deal with it. And if you go back to cybernetics, then the needs of a steering system, like driving a car, would be to say, okay, I need a steering goal. Okay, so this morning I woke up, got into my car, thought I need to go to Tudor, and today I really do not want to hit pedestrians. It's a nasty hobby, so today I will not. So I need states and vectors of objects and environment. So where am I? Where's the pedestrian going? She was at a 90-degree angle to the curb, walking towards my car while I was driving. Oh, okay. And then I can do a SWOT analysis. What's the chance of the pedestrian continuing to walk towards my car while I'm going at the same angle, 90 degrees, at 50 kilometers an hour? Fairly high. Countermeasure, brake. Now I'm in a hurry. Okay, home. So that's my intervention plan. Conduct the intervention. Steering goals. I still don't want to hit the pedestrian. They're not responding. So effects of earlier steering didn't work. So okay, now I have to hit the brake. And you can do the same with changes of enterprise, of course. So it's just plain cybernetics. But applied to our field, the steering goals probably is the enterprise's goals, but also more refined ones. And that's really about models. Steering goals can be captured as models. They're goal models. You can there's a way of translating your strategy into more model-based structure. The states and vectors. States and vectors. So not many architecture approaches, not that I know of anyway, look at the actual vector of the fact that the enterprise is in motion and where's it going. They only look at the state. Archimate, UPDM, ARIS, UML, state. Where are we? Of course, there is the transition in the state, but it's the transition of the running system, not where it's moving. So the vectors, effects of steering. What did we try in the past? We tend not to record attempts in the past to make changes to the organization. We tend to forget about them, so we try things over and over again, and then wonder why it doesn't work. SWOT, analysis, risk analysis, they essentially also produce models. And the actual plan, a project plan is essentially also a model. Because a project plan is just a workflow. So that's why it's very interesting to look at it from a model perspective. And of course, do this fast. So that could lead to further aspect systems where we say we have a sensing act flowing in the motioning system and the running system as part of the steering. So where does EA fit? Well, if you look at EA, I would say that there are roughly 3 phases. There's your first phase where we say it's about IT architecture, enterprise-wide IT architecture, then called enterprise architecture. There's a second phase that overlaps a little bit, where we said we're going to look at co-design of business in IT. In the past, the first phase, it was really a matter of we have people who define what the business needs, and then, because at that stage IT was very much about automation of information processing in an organization. But with the advent of e-commerce, the internet, IT became a business enabler, new business. So yeah, with IT we can design actually the business. And yeah, companies like Google, Salesforce, etc. They're all IT. Amazon is IT. So what's the business? Yeah. So that's co-design the business in IT, and then steering emotion would be the next step. So going back to that, in '87 the Zachman framework was created, but before that at HP, involving also, for instance, Davenport, maybe you know business process improvement, Davenport, Zachman, they worked on a project with HP, IBM, and a lot of clients. It was only HP, but a lot of clients, to look at essentially big transformations, leading to essentially already the awareness that architecture was a concept that was needed. In parallel, of course, in Germany, Scheer started working on Iris. So that was in '86. '87 we saw the Zachman framework. Often Zachman is considered to be the start of enterprise architecture, but it's the most widely published one at the start. Arguably it goes a bit back further. These were still very much focused on, okay, we have people who thought about the business, and now let's look at what IT support is needed. Co-design came up with people like Tapscott and Carsten, saying that it's really about multiple, as this one, multiple views that need to be balanced and influencing each other. So you can't just say we start here, work down. It's all over the place. It needs to interact. So co-design. That's then the modern word, co-design. On the right-hand side, you see the framework from Henderson and Van Katterman, who all also say we have business and IT, strategy and operations, and that needs to be aligned, continuous alignment between all of them. So that also leads to co-design flow. Then 3, that has to do with the fact that we say it's not simply a story of we have an as-is situation of a technological artifact, and we design where we want to be, a little bit vague, but it's still a state, a target, and we just do the transformation. And that leads to what we have in TOGAF at the moment, where we have a baseline architecture, we know where we are, and we have a target, we roughly know where we want to move towards. But of course it's a vector, and we can try to understand the vector, and we can do quite a lot by taking snapshot photos and figure out where it moves, but we need to look beyond that. It's still homework. And then of course we can look at intervening in the direction of the vector. So it's not just saying a target state, we need to look at how to intervene in the natural movement, and what happens in the enterprise to change the direction. And there we need the sensing act flow. Enterprise architecture is really in the middle of that activity. Yeah, so also important to realize that enterprise architecture is not all of this. Because normal design activities, software design, business process design, is also part of this loop. It's about thinking about where we want to be or what we want to change. So enterprise is not all of that, and architecture in general could be argued to be really about the properties of an artifact, such as an enterprise, such as IT, such as a house, that are necessary and sufficient to meet the essential requirements. The rest, you also need to specify, but that's design. This is what is essential to the requirements. Essential requirements? That's relative. That's subjective. That's not an absolute criterion. It's absolutely correct. So that's again why this diagram is now completely unreadable, but the previous version I discussed about this is about which parties to involve, which stakeholder groups to involve, what's important from the strategies of the enterprise. What forces do we need to include in the discussion? Because that defines what the essential requirements are. Not these analytical frameworks like Archimate, Capgemini's framework, the Zachman framework. They're very important in doing the actual design work at architecture level or design level. But we need to know which parties we need to involve. And there we need to identify what's essential. What keeps senior management awake? Are they kept awake by the security question of, my God, I hope these idiots in our organization don't start using all kinds of stuff that stores information in the cloud, because that's a danger to our core business. If that keeps them awake at night, then they will probably be willing to formulate an architecture principle saying, thou shalt not use the cloud, and also an enforcement mechanism. If you violate that principle, the first response will be to look for firing you. Then we have established a really clear governance context. If it's not at that level, then you should wonder if it's really architectural. And of course, this is an extreme example to fire someone, but operationally, when we have those principles I showed at the start, that's something that you can take and look at a design that a project tries to do, or some change that someone tries to do. Does it comply to the principle? I found this neat app. It just doesn't run in the portal, but it's still nice. It will support something new. Yeah, sorry, it doesn't run in the portal. Who cares? And when you have that, you don't have enforcement of that principle. Ideally, if you identify as an enterprise architect that a project does that, say, we found this neat app and it will help us quickly reach new business. If that's the case, and the enterprise architect cannot go back to senior management and say, I think we have a problem over there, and the senior manager will not come along and tell the local business unit manager, nice app, but no. If that can't happen, the principle shouldn't be in your architecture, because then you don't have any governance structure. So it's that game. It also goes back to this, which goes back to the essential requirements. If it's not essential, then leave it out. It's a waste of time. To structure the dialogue, you can then use Zachman to get more structure in the dialogue. So in sum, enterprise architecture then is really about, the purpose there is to steer the motion, where we're going. Meaning to senior management is to make sense in terms of the essential requirements. Make sense of past. How did things happen? The present, how did we get here? And why are we moving? And the future, where are we moving? Where do we want to move? And operationally, towards designers, towards the designers of business processes, the designers of software, it is a reduction of design freedom. You should not use that app because it doesn't provide an interface to the portal. It's not allowing a portal, so no. That's in reduction of design freedom. You cannot do that. You could also say it's the reduction of design stress, because if you're a good designer, a good engineer, then you realize that your decisions might impact a lot of other decisions. And if you don't see senior people taking decisions to provide a context in which you can make the right decision, it creates stress if you're a good designer. So it sounds negative, reduction of design freedom. But the positive element is that it leads to reduction of design stress, because the right decisions, the essential decisions, have been taken. If there's no information about thou shalt use the portal, then okay, use the app. But at least someone took a decision not to take that decision. So apparently it's neutral. So EA, yeah, but it's not only at EA that we need to steer here, it's also design, of course. Design also makes decisions. but EA focuses on those essential ones. But you can have different levels of essential, and in the constructed world around us, we're quite used to that, because we can make a city plan. What we can do with the Kiersberg Plateau. We can sketch buildings. We can plan a swimming pool. We can plan business centers, like here. We can plan shopping malls. So we can design it at that level, and we can actually design the buildings themselves. And there's different levels of what is essential, and also different levels at which we might recognize architecture. And TOGAF happens to suggest, I'm not strictly a TOGAF believer, I just mentioned that they suggest to say, okay, we have strategic, second, and capability level. Different granularity levels at which you might look at an organization, therefore also different granularity level of what you might consider to be essential. And then also different levels of the Sensing Act activities and the PDCA rhetoric if you want to apply. And in TOGAF that indeed leads to also identifying different levels of their so-called ADM. It's the driving engine of architecture with TOGAF, the ADM, architecture development methodology, but it's really a process. It's different levels at which you need to apply them. And then of course you can do that from strategy all the way to design. There's a strategy, especially, I mean, I always explain it that a strategy is, the guys from McKinsey gave a presentation, there's a whole cloud of slides, and you pick them up, and then you have to start working. That's when an architect should be starting to work. Ideally a bit earlier, but this cloud of slides that represents strategy is still open and vague, so you need to make that more concrete. That's when you need the strategic architect. Ideally, the strategic architecture should be delivered by people from McKinsey already, because otherwise it doesn't connect. So that should be connected. Then you can refine it to the second capability, and then you have the level of actual small change project. A small project, well, something you can call a project rather than a program. If a project would need an architecture, then it's not a project, it would be a program, because otherwise it's too big. Then a final thought here is the question of what to architect. Because if you look a lot at the architecture methods and examples we have there, they're always architecting the running system. So designing a future state of the mill, of the running system. But if I work in an organization that actually changes a lot, then it might actually be more sensible to architect the change ability. If I'm in a highly innovative sector, then designing the ideal process, yeah, that sounds nice, but by the time the ideal process is implemented, you're already doing something else. Sorry. So there I might actually shift my architecture focus to architecting the motioning system that directly changes the running system. The innovation engine. You say, okay, create new products, new ideas, get it to fruition, and get it running. And then when it's stable, we'll just sell it off and someone else will do the process optimization in the running system. We just want to have this machine that produces new companies and business ideas quickly. It's a different focus of architecture. 2 minutes or 2 seconds.
Minutes.
Okay. That fits. So, because in sum, if you look at enterprise architecting, then there are really 4 core ingredients. We need to identify an engagement framework. That's the thing. Who do we need involved, and who can make sensible statements about what is essential, and who needs to be at the table, and who do we need to involve in a real fight beforehand, not afterwards. A design framework. What's our philosophy? How do we believe we should design systems? So ask the design framework, but the others too, of course. Communication framework. What are the views we need to talk to different people? That matches this one to that, of course. And the process framework. That's the ADM wheel of TOGAF, but whatever you choose, you need a process. And those things need to be in place if you want to do architecture. Okay, the last minute, EA and PI. Well, I think I started out with the question, okay, what can we learn from each other? But when I look at it more carefully, I think, wait a minute, actually it's orthogonal. So yeah, we can learn, but it's a little bit more complicated. Or not. Because process improvement, in my view, is just a type of enterprise motion. Don't need it. But EA is just a steering instrument. And if you do process improvement, you need steering. So you can use enterprise architecture for that. But enterprise architecture, of course, doesn't just look at process improvement, it looks at all kinds of change you might want to do. So it provides more context. So in a way, I would say they're complementary views. I think what EA already learned is this PDCA written. EA is a field. Doesn't mean that if you go to an organization that they do it like that. Enterprise architects are really ivory tower people. I worked in industry a few times, also in academia. The last transition from academia into industry, I thought I entered an ivory tower. I came from academia, went to an organization where a consultancy firm, I will not name them, but a consultancy firm was helping those people to create an architecture function. And what they were doing was just ivory tower work. They did not go back to the real organization to see what's needed here. Where are we? No, and that's not just that consultancy firm. Other ones do the same thing. It's just in the field. Architects like to think. That's what I do at university, but not when I worked at a consultancy firm. Okay. So sense, think, act. That's also something that we picked up along the way, which I think also plays a role in process improvement. And also this multi-stakeholder involvement. I'm not sure if we could say we learned that from process improvement. I think process improvement should also learn from that experience. But it's certainly a lesson that we could see in the field. What PI might learn from EA? Architecture. What is essential? And not just process improvement. Because if you want to realize what and why to improve, you need to know the context. If you're improving the running system and the holding company say, yeah, okay, but we're going to just sell it off and it's then what's the priority of improving that? Where is really the value for the business to improve? And coherence between multiple aspects. Because doing a business process improvement might not necessarily be an improvement overall. Or the decisions you might make might violate other considerations. So you need to look at the broader picture and architecture, especially through the principles and the whole dialogue linked to the stakeholders, provides more input to say, okay, this is really an optimization that we know it's worthwhile to optimize. So, time, right?
Okay, can you go back to slide 51, because I see probably a more closer link where SPI or PI would fit there. Yeah. The point is you could move process improvement to a more general framework that continuously you measure, but you feedback like in the PDCA cycle if the processes which are modeled are really efficient on the ground. You know, I could propose, let's say, a new sales process, but then after I have implemented the process, it takes them 10 hours more to do it. Yeah? Did it really reduce, as I promised, half an hour, or did it add hours? Yeah? So I would say here the fifth point is missing the evaluation framework.
Yes.
So this is a very simple idea, because what would you think about it? Because then the PDCA cycle would be more complete. Yeah. Because you get the kind of, how would you stick, you said yourself, you stay on the ground and you don't like the ivory tower. But then it would mean that you offer a service in future to these companies to say, I have a build to the enterprise architecture, yeah, we agreed it, but let's measure it in a service situation, yeah, and then let's refine it based on the matrix.
Yeah, I like that. I would even go further and say, let's call it the sensing framework.
Yeah.
In the sense that all the models we use are essentially, could be treated all the design models, including the motivations, are hypotheses of what we expect to observe after it has been realized.
Yeah.
And that way also, I mean, separate from process improvement, when I create a new IT architecture, I can use the model as a baseline to see, is reality behaving like the model? And if not, I need to take action. Either correct the model or correct reality. Or at least put a dirty bit on that part of the model saying, that's not correct anymore.
Yeah, any model is always, even from physics, only a kind of estimation of the reality. So also your architecture will never be the reality, but it should come closer to the reality. So it would be unlikely that your methods always hit directly, but they would be close or should stay close.
But by calling it a sensing framework, we should then also articulate, first of all, how we're going to operationalize measuring there. And when do we consider deviation bad enough to take action? And then during the conference I was in yesterday, people also talked about sensor networks. But not just out there, but also in social networks and how people work together. So that way you can also have a pool of sensors that measure what happens in the actual organization at the network level, at the social interaction level, at the business process level, how people work, and then check that separate from privacy. But we have things in Google anyway, so we don't have privacy anymore. So just monitor that and then match it with more.
I agree. This is because this would complete your model here, and the sensor idea is only one potential realization of it, because you might have other parameters.
It's just one tiny problem that's already here. I like 3, so that's too many. But
I think the question is, can there be a process framework without this evaluation framework? Because maybe it's one. You could make something in one step, you know. But I'm pretty sure that's the improvement idea. We don't have to have an assessment. Improvement can be many ways, you know. But one principle is actually what we see in the PDCA, that we learn from matrix and then we change again, but we measure.
Yes.
Okay, just one idea.
Thank you.
To find the links.
A very simple question. It's about Dropbox. You just mentioned Dropbox as you could drop things in, but of course it's a huge enterprise. How many Dropboxes do we need? Who gets to see what? And how do we provide feedback from the Dropboxes?
I provided Dropbox as an example of where someone might make a decision that impacts maybe the enterprise strategy. Now we turn to Dropbox and say, okay, if it's an enterprise, and how much do we need? That's a different question. It goes beyond this presentation. So I can voice my opinion about that, but it's a bit difficult to forecast, because
and how secure would it be in a large enterprise?
And because from a user perspective, we have OneDrive, we have Dropbox, we have iDrive soon, we have Google Drive. What are you using? Of course, we want to have only one system. So,
but we chose the Dropbox as the example.
The reason for that is that because I've been using that the longest. And that is also, in my experience, is the most reliable one in syncing. And I also like to put my eggs in different baskets. My email is in Gmail, including my work email. Dropbox I use for files. Amazon I use for my books. And my music is in iCloud.
Thank you.
But I think, as you said, it's depending on the strategy of the company, because when you do a contract, let's say with the VW company, or any tier 1 in automotive, then it's an NDA case when we put files of that on the Dropbox.
But there in the NDA, I mean, as a worker, I would then also ask, okay, then tell me which platforms to use. Because, for instance, our organization, we use for email Lotus Notes. And as far as I know, that's a product of an American company. It falls under Patriot Act. So what's, from a security point of view, the difference between Google and IBM?
Yeah. Okay.
Better use features. Better use those features.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, you mentioned about two frameworks, one design framework and communication framework.
Yeah.
Yes. Could you explain about a little bit more in communication framework? Because communication is kind of an interaction and some networking. So I think it's a little different from design framework. Could you explain a little bit more?
Yes, yes. Before I go into the answer, I am not fully 100% certain if the communication framework should not be sucked into the engagement framework. But the communication framework is more operationalization in that sense, towards saying which views am I going to use. So am I going to use these landscape maps, or am I going to use an animation, or am I going to use a play as a theatrical play to illustrate the change? How am I going to do that? To communicate potential impact on concerns of stakeholders. So where the top one, this table with the people involved, is identifying which parties to involve. The communication framework is thinking about how should we communicate the message. Associated to it are also strategies. So should we use workshops, or should we just make a decision and tell people what is the best communication strategy to use there? And for the moment there's also a placeholder to say we need to think about that, not just in research but also practically. As an example, I had two of my PhD students. They looked at different collaboration engineering strategies to create the collaboration, the stakeholder involvement in an operational sense. So what are the good strategies to engage stakeholders in decision-making processes? The top one was another PhD student who looked at saying, okay, how do we put the whole framework together? It's the engagement. So, this is my shopping list, but I'm not saying that it's fully orthogonal yet. And good point, it should be a fifth bullet.
Yeah. Then you have PI integrated.
Yeah. Yeah, something. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. I think